The room went silent. The cameras froze. And for a moment, it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. Because no one ever imagined a day like this would come, a day when a member of the monarchy would stand before a courtroom, facing accusations tied to one of the most shocking tragedies in modern royal history. Have you ever wondered what really happens when whispers become headlines, when headlines become investigations, and when investigations uncover things that were never meant to see the light? Today, you're stepping into that unfolding storm. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But here's the first twist. This isn't a documentary, and it isn't a news bulletin. This is a dramatic exploration of the what-ifs, the theories, the unanswered questions, and the emotional weight that has followed the legacy of Princess Diana for decades. And it all centers on a fictionalized courtroom reckoning, one that pushes the imagination right into the space between what was said, what was believed, and what the world still wonders about. Imagine the scene. A polished wooden bench, murmurs echoing like restless ghosts, flashbulbs cracking through the air. And at the center of it, Queen Camilla, a figure who has lived in the shadow of Diana's memory and the glare of public fascination. Why does this moment feel so electric, so dangerous, so impossible to ignore? Because even in fiction, this emotional collision hits nerves that have never stopped pulsing. Let's step into it slowly, but with eyes wide open. What if a courtroom became the stage where decades of speculation finally demanded answers? What if the public, long divided by loyalty, curiosity, and heartbreak, was suddenly confronted with the possibility of a verdict, even a fictional one? And more importantly, why does the world still care so fiercely about Diana, even after all these years? You feel it, don't you? That pull, that ache of unresolved history. The story doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts with a legacy. A woman adored, misunderstood, hunted by cameras, embraced by millions, and gone far too soon. And it starts with the complicated truth that her memory never rested. Not in newspapers, not in whispers, not in royal halls, and not in the minds of those who still believe there was more to her story than the official reports ever revealed. But here's where things get even more fascinating. Why now? Why would this imagined trial happen in this moment, in this era, in this cultural temperature? Because the world has changed. Transparency has changed. Power has changed. And the monarchy, once untouchable, now lives under the same scrutiny as celebrities, CEOs, tech giants, and presidents. The royal mystique isn't gone, but it's cracked. And through those cracks, stories like this, even fictional ones, slip through with explosive force. Ask yourself this. What would you feel if a figure associated with Diana's past suddenly found themselves in a courtroom, listening to accusations that mirrored the fears, suspicions, and theories that never died? Would you lean in? Would you recoil? Would you question everything you thought you knew? That's why this story matters. Because whether it's fiction, speculation, symbolism, or emotional catharsis, it exposes something real. The world never let go of Diana, and it never will. As the gallery fills, as the fictional judge calls the court to order, as the cameras quietly adjust their focus, another question rises, one the audience can't escape. Is this about justice? Or is it about ghosts? Is it about truth? Or about the need for closure? Or is it something even more unsettling? The realization that Diana's story shaped the monarchy more after her death than during her life? This introduction isn't here to answer those questions. It's here to pull you into them, to make you sit with them, to make you wonder what the world would do if the unresolved suddenly demanded resolution. And just when the tension reaches its tightest point, something happens in the courtroom. Something that turns the fictional proceedings into a spectacle no one could have predicted. A wobble, a moment of shock, a collapse that sends gasps rolling through the air like thunder. But was it fear? Was it pressure? Was it something hidden? Or was it something much darker? The cameras scramble. Voices rise. The world watches. The courtroom doors slammed shut as medics rushed forward, but the whispers moved faster than they did. People clutched their phones, their hands trembling, unsure whether to record, to pray, or to gasp. Have you ever noticed how quickly a room full of strangers becomes a single organism when shock strikes? One breath, one shiver, one question spreading like wildfire. What just happened? Some said it was fainting. Others said panic. A few claimed it was guilt, fictional or not. But there were eyes in that room. Sharp eyes, skeptical eyes, grieving eyes, and those eyes saw something different. Something deeper. Something that didn't look like a simple physical collapse. You could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating, like the moment before a storm breaks the sky open. And as the medics lifted her, as cameras strained to capture a glimpse, as the fictional judge attempted to restore order, another realization slipped in like a cold draft under a locked door. This wasn't just a trial. It was a reckoning, not of law, but of memory, not of evidence, but of emotion, not of crime, but of narrative. And the audience, you included, has always been part of that narrative. Because everyone remembers where they were when Diana's story ended. Everyone remembers the headlines. The flowers piled outside palaces. The rivers of tears. The disbelief. The silence. The anger. The unanswered questions. Even people who weren't born yet feel the echo of it, carried through documentaries, conversations, and the quiet ache in the public consciousness. So here's the real question, the one sitting beneath this fictional story like a heartbeat under skin. Why does Diana still feel present? Why does her shadow stretch longer than time allows? Why does her name spark emotion faster than logic? Is it because she was human in a world that demanded perfection? Is it because she was fragile in a world that monetized flaws? Is it because she was loved in a world that feared love? Ask yourself this. If a person's memory never fades, did they ever truly leave? Maybe that's why this imagined courtroom moment feels so powerful, even though it isn't real. It's not about guilt. It's not about verdicts. It's not about royal titles, crowns, or institutions. It's about a wound that never healed, a story that never finished, a goodbye that never felt complete. And now, in this fictional narrative, that wound is being reopened, not with answers, but with possibilities. Not with facts, but with emotional truth. Not with closure, but with confrontation. The medics wheel her out, but the eyes in the room don't follow her. They turn inward. They turn backward. They turn to the past, to Paris, to flashing cameras, to a tunnel, to a moment the world wishes it could rewrite. And that's when it happens. Someone stands, not physically taller, but emotionally taller. Someone whose voice carries not authority, but history. Someone who was closest to the heart of the story the world still aches for. Their presence sends ripples through the air, the way a name can silence a crowd, the way a memory can overpower reality. The fictional audience leans forward. The gallery stops breathing. Even the judge hesitates. Because whoever speaks next will shift everything. The tone, the atmosphere, the expectation. And that's when the narrative pivots. Slowly, deliberately, like a door opening into a room no one knew existed. A single sentence is spoken, not loud, not forceful, but devastating. And the entire courtroom changes. The audience, the real one watching this video, suddenly realizes something. This story isn't about collapse. It's about what caused the collapse. This story isn't about guilt. It's about the weight of perception. This story isn't about the past. It's about the past refusing to stay buried. But here's where you need to brace yourself. Because the next part of the story doesn't unfold in the courtroom at all. It unfolds in memories, in secrets, in conversations behind closed doors, in diary entries never meant to be read, in glances that lasted too long, in silences that explained too much. It unfolds in the space where history and imagination blur so convincingly that the audience begins to question which one feels more real. And that is where the narrative is about to take you. Into the backstory, into the rivalry, into the emotional battlefield that existed long before any fictional trial. But before we step into that deeper territory, the judge makes an announcement, one that freezes every heartbeat in the room. A recess, a delay, a pause that feels like the inhale before a scream. And you know what pauses do, don't you? They make the mind wander. They make fear grow teeth. They make memory turn violent. And as the courtroom empties, as reporters swarm, as speculation mutates like smoke, one final question lands. Heavy, cold, and impossible to ignore. If this fictional collapse happened because of the pressure of the verdict, what will happen when the verdict is actually spoken? Because the world, even in imagination, is not prepared for it. And neither is the monarchy. But what comes next will peel back a layer of the story that has never been touched. Not in tabloids, not in interviews, not in documentaries, and it will force the audience to see Diana's legacy through a lens they never expected. And what comes after that? Well, it didn't start in the courtroom. It didn't even start in the palace. It began long before that, in a moment most people would have overlooked, a moment that seemed harmless, casual, almost forgettable. But isn't that how the biggest turning points often arrive? Quietly, softly, without warning. Here's the question that pulls you in. What if the story behind this fictional trial didn't begin with conflict, but with curiosity? Picture it. A hallway lined with portraits, gold frames, velvet carpet, the kind of silence that only exists in places where secrets have been polished into tradition. And walking through that hallway is a young aide, anonymous, unnoticed, carrying a stack of documents that would later ignite the spark of everything that followed. Have you ever wondered how history, even fictional history, shifts because someone picked up the wrong file, opened the wrong drawer, overheard the wrong conversation? This is where the narrative rewinds, not to blame, not to accuse, but to unravel. Because Chapter 1 isn't about collapse. It's about the first tremor, the first whisper, the first tiny crack in the wall that was never supposed to break. The aide pauses. Something catches their eye. A folder out of place. Not dusty, not forgotten, recently disturbed. This is important. Things in palaces don't move unless someone in power moves them. And inside that folder? Not evidence. Not confessions. Something far more dangerous. Emotion. Letters. Diaries. Fragments of a past that refuse to stay silent. And here's where the audience leans closer, because the name written on the first page, in looping, unmistakable script, belongs to the woman whose memory still stirs the world. Princess Diana. But this isn't about authenticity, not about proof, not about claims. This is about symbolism, the way a story can take on a life of its own once someone believes they have found a missing piece. The aide reads just one line, and suddenly everything shifts. Because the line suggests something the world has always speculated about, that Diana felt watched, observed, closed in, not by enemies, but by people she once trusted. Is it true? Is it invention? Is it projection? That doesn't matter here. What matters is how it feels. And it feels electric. Ask yourself this. If you found a sentence like that, would you put it back? Or would you keep reading? The aide kept reading. And with every paragraph, the air thickened. The diary entries, imagined or metaphorical, painted a picture not of conspiracy, but of loneliness. A loneliness the world never understood. A loneliness that makes the audience feel something unexpected, protective. Because for the first time, this fictional narrative reveals Diana not as a symbol, but as a woman, vulnerable, trapped, searching for someone who would listen. And the more the aide reads, the more another name begins to appear in the margins. Camilla, not accused, not blamed, not villainized, but present, a shadow in the emotional landscape. A reminder that Diana's heartache existed alongside another woman's existence, a collision the world never stopped dissecting. The aide feels something unsettling, not outrage, not anger, but possibility. And possibility is dangerous, because possibility becomes rumor. Rumor becomes theory. Theory becomes narrative. And narrative becomes belief. Here's where you, the audience, feel the twist tightening. The aide takes the folder, not to expose it, but to understand it. And that single decision becomes the first domino in the fictional chain reaction that will eventually lead to the imagined courtroom, the collapse, and the verdict no one expected. But before that future arrives, Chapter 1 pulls you somewhere deeper, into the emotional archaeology of two women whose lives were forever intertwined in the public imagination. The story shifts into moments, dinners, glances, newspaper headlines, interviews replayed thousands of times. And every moment points to the same tension. Diana was adored. Camilla was tolerated. But what does tolerance do to a person over decades? What does it do to public perception? What does it do to legacy? This chapter doesn't choose sides. It doesn't attack. It doesn't defend. Instead, it raises a question. Can two women be trapped by the same story in different ways? The audience knows something the characters don't. That this emotional excavation will soon fuel speculation. That speculation will fuel suspicion. and that suspicion will fuel the fictional trial that frames the entire narrative. But for now, the chapter lingers in the past, where empathy and unease mix like smoke. The aide begins to notice patterns, imagined connections, subtle echoes, parallels that feel too poetic to ignore. Diana's words read like prophecy. Camilla's presence feels like foreshadowing. And even though none of it is concrete, the sensation is intoxicating. And this is where the pacing shifts. Shorter sentences, sharper beats, the feeling of something approaching. Because the aide isn't the only one who has seen the folder. Someone else noticed it missing. Someone higher. Someone quieter. Someone who has far more to lose. And in that moment, the story pivots again, from curiosity to consequence. Footsteps in the corridor. A voice calling the aide's name. A request to step into a private room. The air chills. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Because this is the moment where the audience realizes something crucial. This story isn't about the past. It's about the danger of uncovering it. The aide enters the room. A senior official waits. Smiling. Too kindly. Asking too casually whether any documents were disturbed. The aide lies. Why? Even they don't know. Maybe instinct. Maybe fear. Maybe destiny. And the lie, small, almost invisible, becomes the second domino. Because now there is suspicion on both sides. The aide wonders if they are being watched. The official wonders if the aide saw something. Paranoia blooms like ivy. Slow, silent, inevitable. And the audience feels it. That tightening sensation that tells them the story has begun to coil around itself, preparing to strike. But just when it seems like the tension can't tighten further, the chapter expands outward again, pulling us into the emotional heart of the narrative. Why does Diana's memory still command loyalty? Why does Camilla's image still trigger reaction? Why does the world still choose sides in a story that ended decades ago? Maybe because it never truly ended. Maybe because grief doesn't obey time. Maybe because love leaves fingerprints on history. But before the audience can settle into reflection, the chapter snaps back to suspense, because the folder the aide took is suddenly missing. Not misplaced. Not forgotten. Gone. Removed from their locked drawer while they slept. Which means someone else has it. Someone who shouldn't. Someone who knows its power. And someone who intends to use it. For what? Revenge? Revelation? Reshaping the past? The aide doesn't know. The audience doesn't know. But they want to. And that want is the fuel that carries the narrative into its next escalation. Because the disappearance of the folder triggers something far larger. A fictional investigation within palace walls. Discreet. Unofficial. Urgent. And at its center is one terrifying possibility. What if the contents of that folder reach the public? Not because they are true, but because people will want them to be. And here, the chapter lands its emotional blow. Sometimes, the most dangerous stories aren't the ones that are real. They are the ones people are ready to believe. The aide receives a message. Anonymous. 5 words. We need to talk. Now. And the moment they read it, the chapter shifts into freefall. Because whoever wrote that message knows everything. And what comes next will push the story into a realm where imagination begins to feel like memory, and memory begins to feel like fate. The corridor was empty, yet the aide could feel someone watching. Isn't it strange how the human body senses danger before the mind understands it? A tightening in the spine, a prickle at the back of the neck, a whisper of breath that isn't yours. The message burned in their pocket. Those 5 words repeating like an echo chamber. We need to talk. Now. But who sent it? And how did they know what the aide had seen? The palace, fictionalized, imagined, symbolic, suddenly felt less like a residence and more like a living organism. Walls listening. Floors remembering. Shadows keeping score. Every portrait seemed to stare. Every chandelier seemed to tremble. Every silence seemed to hide a secret. The aide walked faster, heart pounding like footsteps in a tunnel. You know that feeling, don't you? When you're about to discover something you're not sure you want to know. They reached the end of the hallway, pushed open a door, and stepped into the dimly lit archives room. A place where history slept under dust and lock. But tonight, history was awake. A figure stood waiting, back turned, hands clasped behind them, posture rigid. The aide swallowed hard. Should they speak first? Should they run? Should they pretend they knew why they'd been summoned? The figure slowly turned. So it's begun, the person said softly. The aide swallowed hard. You knew this was coming? I knew at the moment she died. The person replied, stepping aside. History doesn't end. It circles. The aide and the figure entered the cottage. It was small, but filled with photographs, letters, clippings, candle stubs, and memory. Not obsession, not shrine. Something else. Something harder to name. Sit, the older figure said. You need to understand what you're carrying. The aide sat. The envelope felt like a living thing now, breathing, pulsing, waiting to be acknowledged. The older figure leaned forward. Tell me what you read. The aide hesitated. Then they spoke the line aloud. I fear the world will remember me by the woman who replaced me. The older figure closed their eyes, not in shock, but in pain. She didn't mean it as accusation, they said quietly. She meant it as sorrow. The aide nodded. I know, but the world won't read it that way. The older figure opened their eyes again. That's why they want it released. The aide frowned. Why? Who benefits from that interpretation? The older figure exhaled slowly, like someone releasing a truth they've carried too long. The ones who want Camilla destroyed. Not legally, not literally, but symbolically. And if the public believes Diana feared being replaced, then every headline, every whisper, every doubt becomes ammunition. The aide felt the weight settle deeper. So this is about public perception. No, the older figure corrected gently. It's about power. Whoever controls Diana's memory controls the emotional loyalty of millions. The room fell silent. The aide finally asked the question burning in their chest. Why tell me? Why help me? The older figure studied them for a long moment. Because you haven't chosen a side yet. And because once you do, there is no coming back. The aide looked down at their shaking hands. What do I do? The older figure stood and walked to a drawer. They pulled out a small, worn cassette tape and placed it on the table. You listen to this, they said, and then you decide. The aide stared at the tape. What is it? The older figure's voice trembled. The last recording Diana ever made in this fictional narrative. The one no one was ever supposed to hear. The aide felt the air leave their lungs. And then, headlights swept across the front window. The older figure's expression collapsed into fear. They found us, they whispered. The mysterious figure moved toward the back exit. The aide grabbed the tape and the envelope. The older figure blew out the lamp. Shadows swallowed the room. Outside, car doors slammed. Boots hit gravel. Voices barked orders. The aide looked toward the back door. Their only escape, but the older figure grabbed their wrist. Listen to me, they whispered. There's something you don't know. Footsteps approached the cottage. Closer, closer. Boards creaked. A hand twisted the doorknob. The older figure leaned in, voice trembling with urgency. Diana wasn't afraid of Camilla. She was afraid of someone else entirely. The door burst open. The door exploded inward, splintering against the wall, and armed silhouettes flooded the cottage. Not shouting, not scrambling, but moving with eerie precision. The aide ducked instinctively, clutching both the cassette tape and the envelope tight against their chest. The mysterious figure pressed them toward the back door, but the older figure didn't move. They stood completely still, as if frozen in time, eyes fixed on the intruders, or on the memory of something older, deeper, more terrifying than the men now filling the room. One of the intruders stepped forward, face obscured, voice calm. We don't want trouble. Hand over the materials, and no one gets hurt. Materials, not documents, not evidence. Materials. A word chosen by someone who knew exactly how dangerous perception could be. The aide's heart pounded. They couldn't hand it over, not because they wanted to protect it, but because they didn't know who would control the narrative if they did. The older figure finally spoke, voice steady, carrying a lifetime of regret. You don't even know what you're chasing. Your dog's running after shadows. The man took another step. It's not shadows we're after. It's containment. Containment. Another word that carried chains. The mysterious figure leaned close to the aide's ear. When I say run, you run. The aide nodded, muscles locked, ready to bolt. But the older figure wasn't finished. You think Diana feared Camilla? You think that's the story the world will cling to? The lead intruder paused. Everyone in the room froze. Even the air seemed to wait. The older figure lifted a trembling hand and pointed. Not at the aide, not at the mysterious figure, not at the envelope or the cassette, but at the door, at the darkness outside, at the world beyond. She feared someone else entirely. They whispered. Someone still alive in this narrative. Someone powerful. Someone who stood to lose everything if the truth, the emotional truth, ever surfaced. The aide felt a chill slash through their spine. The mysterious figure whispered again. Get ready. Boots shifted. Fingers tightened on triggers. The older figure inhaled, preparing to speak the name. But before the word could form, the lights blew out, the room collapsing into pitch black. Shouts. Footsteps. Chaos. The mysterious figure grabbed the aide's arm. Go. They stumbled toward the back, crashing into furniture, tripping over discarded boxes, pushing through hanging blankets that served as makeshift doors. The cottage felt like a maze now. Every step uncertain, every direction a gamble. Behind them, flashlights swept the darkness, beams slicing through dust-filled air. The aide shoved through the back door, the night slamming into them like ice water. The mysterious figure followed, slamming the door behind them and jamming a broken chair under the handle. It wouldn't hold long. This way, they hissed. They ran across the yard, crashing through weeds and brittle branches, the cassette, an envelope thudding against the aide's chest with every stride. In the distance, dogs barked, or maybe wolves. The sky was moonless, the path uneven, the woods dense. Branches clawed at their clothes, roots tried to trip them, shadows twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. Finally, they reached an abandoned greenhouse at the edge of the property. The mysterious figure shoved the aide inside and pulled the door shut, crouching low among shattered pots and dead vines. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the aide's ragged breathing filled the space. Then the mysterious figure turned, eyes burning in the faint sliver of streetlight leaking through broken glass panes. What did they want? The diary page or the tape? The aide shook their head. I don't think they care what's real. I think they care what people will believe. The mysterious figure nodded grimly. Then we're out of time. The aide clutched the cassette tape. What's on this? Why is it so dangerous? The figure's voice dropped to a whisper. In this fictional narrative, it's Diana speaking freely. Not to press. Not to biographers. Not to friends. To herself. The aide swallowed. But why would that matter now? The figure leaned in. Because she talks about fear. Not of paparazzi. Not of the institution. Not of Camilla. The aide's pulse stuttered. Then who? The figure opened their mouth to answer, but voices cut through the night outside, closer now, organized, sweeping the property. The figure grabbed the aide's hand. Listen to me. The person Diana feared, the one the older figure was about to name, is someone still tied to the monarchy in this fictional world. Someone with influence. Someone with secrets. The aide felt ice fill their lungs. You mean? Don't say it. The figure snapped softly. Names have power. Especially this name. Flashlights danced across the yard. The aide whispered. So what now? The figure pointed to a rusted metal hatch in the floor, half buried beneath broken tiles and a collapsed plant rack. Down there. An old coal chute. It leads to the riverbank. We can get out through the water tunnel. The aide stared. Are you serious? Do you want to stay here and ask them instead? The aide shook their head. They moved the debris aside and pulled the hatch open. Cold air rushed up, smelling of stone and damp earth, the smell of forgotten places. The aide climbed down first, gripping the narrow ladder, feeling the darkness swallow them. The mysterious figure followed, pulling the hatch closed above them just as approaching footsteps reached the greenhouse door. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to stand. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, echoing beats. The aide turned on their phone screen for light, and the faint glow illuminated carved initials in the walls, initials layered over each other, decades deep. This tunnel was used before, the aide whispered. The figure nodded. To smuggle out stories. They walked, or half-crouched, through the darkness until the tunnel widened, revealing a trickle of running water and a grate ahead leading to the outside world. But before they reached it, the mysterious figure stopped abruptly. The aide turned. What's wrong? The figure's expression was grim. They've blocked the exit. The aide froze. So we're trapped. The figure shook their head. No, there's another way. But it means listening to the tape. Right here. Right now. The aide's breath caught. Why here? The figure stepped closer, voice low, urgent. Because once you hear what's on it, you'll understand who we're really running from. The aide stared at the cassette. At the envelope. At the darkness stretching ahead. at the danger behind. And then they said the only words that made sense. Play it. The mysterious figure reached into their coat and pulled out a small, battered tape player, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. They slid the cassette in, pressed it down, clicked it shut. A soft whir filled the tunnel. Then a voice. Fragile, haunting, familiar. A voice the world still aches for. I don't think they'll ever let me go, the recording said softly. Not because of who I am, but because of what I know. The aide's skin turned to ice. The tape continued, the whirring of the old machine echoing through the stone tunnel like a heartbeat. The aide and the mysterious figure leaned closer, breath held, the dim glow of the phone screen flickering against the damp walls. The voice, soft, reflective, unmistakably the fictionalized version of Diana, filled the space with a chill that had nothing to do with the underground air. You can feel when someone wants you gone, the recording said, the tone fragile but resolute. Not physically, not violently, just erased, replaced, folded into silence. The aide felt the words settle into their chest like cold water. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't paranoia. It was loneliness carved into language. The mysterious figure closed their eyes, listening with a reverence that bordered on grief. Then the voice continued, quieter still. And it isn't her I fear. It never was. She's a symptom, not a cause. A mirror, not an enemy. The real danger is the one who smiles when the doors close. The aide's pulse stumbled. The mysterious figure opened their eyes slowly. This is it, they whispered. This is the part they can't allow to surface, even in fiction. The tape crackled, the recording warbling softly, as if time itself resisted allowing the next words to be heard. The aide leaned closer, straining to catch every syllable. Because when someone is beloved, the recorded voice continued, their silence becomes a weapon. And the one I fear most is the one the world would never question. The aide's thoughts raced. The older figure in the cottage had tried to speak a name, but had been interrupted. Now, the recording edged closer to revealing what had been withheld. The mysterious figure gripped the aide's arm. Listen carefully. This is the key to everything. The tape whined, hesitated, then resumed. They tell you loyalty is protection, but loyalty is only protection when it goes both ways. And mine does not. The aide exhaled slowly, realization dawning. This wasn't a message of blame. It was a message of abandonment. A message of betrayal. A message from someone who felt unguarded, unshielded, unseen. And suddenly, the fictional trial, the collapse, the envelope, the chase, all of it shifted meaning. It wasn't about pointing fingers. It wasn't about guilt. It was about who the public believed had failed her emotionally, not physically. The tape clicked off. Silence rushed back into the tunnel, thick and heavy. The aide stared at the player. That's it, they whispered. There's no name? The mysterious figure shook their head. No name. There never was. Because the power of the message isn't in who she feared. They turned toward the aide, eyes intense. It's in who the world thinks she meant. The aide felt the realization hit like a blow. The recording could be interpreted 100 different ways. 1,000, depending on who heard it. Depending on what they already believed. Depending on what they wanted to believe. The mysterious figure spoke again, voice urgent. Now you understand why they're chasing us. Not because of truth, but because of interpretation. Once this recording reaches the public, they will fill in the blanks themselves. The aide swallowed hard. And most will fill it with Camilla. Even though the recording never mentioned her. Even though the emotion was broader, deeper, more complex. Even though the fear pointed elsewhere. The mysterious figure nodded grimly. And once that happens, this fictional narrative leads to only one outcome. A trial of perception. A verdict shaped by grief, nostalgia, longing, myth. A pause. And no one survives a myth. The aide leaned against the damp wall, overwhelmed. So what do we do now? The mysterious figure glanced toward the blocked tunnel exit, where faint beams of light danced against the grate. Search teams approaching, closing in. There's only one path left, they said. We don't hide the recording. The aide stared at them, stunned. You want to release it? No, the figure replied. We want to release it to the only person who can control the narrative instead of being crushed by it. The aide's breath caught. Camilla. The figure nodded once. If she hears it first, if she understands it, if she responds to it. Then the story changes direction. The world won't see her as the target. The aide finished the thought. They'll see her as the witness. A new kind of silence filled the tunnel. Not fear, not panic, but possibility. Dangerous possibility. Because now the audience sees the turn. This fictional story is no longer about exposure. It's about intervention. The mysterious figure reached into their coat and pulled out a folded map, edges worn, lines smudged. There's a private route into the residence, they said. An old service passage, sealed on paper, but still accessible. If we get to her before they get to us, she can decide how the world hears this. The aides shook their head in disbelief. She'll never agree to meet us. The mysterious figure's expression darkened. She will if she knows the alternative. Outside, boots pounded against the earth above them. Radios crackled. Voices shouted instructions. Dogs barked. The aide clutched the tape, clutched the envelope, clutched the fear, and clutched the truth. They were no longer running from something. They were running toward something. Something larger than themselves. Something irreversible. The mysterious figure lifted the grate covering the side shaft, a narrow crawl space leading deeper underground. This tunnel leads beneath the old railway. From there, we can surface without detection. The aide hesitated. Once we start down there, there's no turning back, is there? The mysterious figure shook their head. No, because once you carry a story like this, you don't get to choose whether you finish it. You only choose how. The aide crawled into the opening, heart pounding, each movement echoing the knowledge that they were stepping into a point of no return. The mysterious figure followed, replacing the grate behind them just as flashlights illuminated the earlier section of the tunnel. The crawlspace descended at a steep angle, the stones slick with moisture, the air tightening into a narrow column. The aide's shoulders brushed the walls. Their breath came in shallow bursts. The darkness felt alive, pressing against them, urging them forward. Finally, the passage opened into a wider chamber. An abandoned railway conduit lined with rusted pipes and forgotten cables. The mysterious figure dropped down beside them, wiping dirt from their hands. This is where the story changes, they said. The aide held the tape against their chest. But what if she refuses to hear it? The mysterious figure met their gaze. Then the world will hear it instead. A distant rumble vibrated through the chamber. Not pursuit, not search teams. A train. A symbolic threshold. The mysterious figure pointed. We catch that train. It takes us within walking distance of the residence. The aide nodded, adrenaline replacing hesitation. They moved toward the service platform, the recording still echoing in their mind. Not because of who I am, but because of what I know. The aide whispered the thought forming in their chest. If the world thinks she feared Camilla, the fictional trial becomes inevitable. The mysterious figure nodded. And if they realize she feared someone else? The aide finished the sentence. The entire monarchy becomes the suspect in the court of public opinion. The train screeched into the tunnel, sparks dancing along the tracks. The mysterious figure grabbed the aide's arm. This is our last chance to redirect the story. The aide stepped toward the edge, toward the train, toward the moment the audience knows is coming. The train door slid open with a metallic groan, and the aide stepped inside, the mysterious figure close behind. The carriage was nearly empty, just a few scattered passengers staring out windows, lost in their own worlds, unaware that history, even fictional history, was unfolding a few feet away. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting pale shadows across the aisle. The train lurched forward, accelerating into darkness. The aide sank into a seat, gripping the cassette tape as if it were a lifeline. The envelope rested inside their coat, its edges pressing against their ribs like a reminder. The mysterious figure sat opposite them, eyes scanning the carriage, calculating risks, mapping exits. You felt that, haven't you? That sensation of moving forward while your mind sprints backward through everything that led you here? Finally, the aide spoke. What if meeting her only makes things worse? What if hearing the recording hurts her more than the public ever could? The mysterious figure looked at them steadily. Pain isn't the danger here. Silence is. Silence lets other people define your story. The aide looked down at the tape. And you think she'll want to define hers? I think she won't have a choice, the figure replied. Not if this gets out. Claire arrived moments later, calm, focused, grounded. She offered a polite greeting to the crew, nodded toward Megan, and immediately began reviewing the ingredients laid out for the day's featured dish. A simple recipe on the surface, but elevated by technique, plating finesse, flavor balance, texture variation. The kind of recipe that reveals the difference between someone who cooks and someone who crafts. And that, according to the cameraman, was the problem. Because today's featured moment required Claire to demonstrate a finishing touch, a garnish placed in a specific position for a specific visual effect, rooted in culinary tradition. And Megan had other ideas. The scene began normally. Cameras rolled. The director signaled quiet. Megan introduced the dish with sparkling enthusiasm. Claire added professional insight. The balance seemed intact, fragile, but functioning. Then came the garnish. Claire placed it carefully at the edge of the plate. Megan frowned. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but visibly enough that the cameraman zoomed in by instinct alone. She reached forward, moved the garnish, shifted it toward the center of the dish. A tiny adjustment, a monumental message. Claire paused, not offended, just surprised. She smiled gently and explained, for the audience's benefit. The placement affects the visual flow and highlights the textures. It's intentional. Megan laughed. The wrong kind of laugh. The kind that says, I'm pretending this is funny so no one notices that I'm annoyed. Then she said it. Oh, I just thought it looked prettier this way. Prettier. Not better. Not more balanced. Not more refined. Prettier. The cameraman said that word acted like a blade, not because of what it meant, but because of what it dismissed. Years of expertise. Tradition. Technique. Mastery reduced to decoration. Have you ever seen someone invalidate a lifetime of skill in a single sentence? Claire didn't respond immediately. She simply repositioned the garnish back to its original location and continued the explanation for the camera. Professional. Measured. Graceful. But Megan's expression changed again. A microsecond of tension, a flicker of resentment, a tightening in the jaw. The director kept filming. The crew held their breath. And then, the moment that transformed a tiny disagreement into a noticeable fracture. Megan moved the garnish again. Not casually this time. Deliberately. Slowly. Making eye contact with Claire as she did it. The cameraman said you could feel the room freeze. Even the simmering sauce on the stovetop felt quieter. The boom operator shifted his stance. A production assistant looked down at their clipboard like it suddenly became fascinating. Everyone pretended nothing was happening, because acknowledging it would make it real. Claire inhaled softly. Not anger. Not offense. Disappointment. The kind of disappointment that comes from realizing a partnership isn't a partnership at all. She gently placed her hand on the edge of the plate, not touching Megan, just grounding herself, and said, There's a reason for the placement. It guides the dish. Megan smiled again, but this time the smile was icy enough to chill boiling water. Well, I think it looks more approachable like this. Approachable. Another coded word. Another challenge disguised as creativity. Another assertion of dominance. The director stepped in, trying to smooth everything with a neutral tone. Let's try a version both ways. But the cameraman said it was too late. The shift had already happened. The balance was broken. The authority had been questioned. The expertise had been undermined on camera. And that's when the first real ripple spread through the crew. Because now it wasn't just tension. It was sides, small glances, silent opinions, unspoken alignment. Megan continued the scene with animated enthusiasm, but it didn't land the same way. It felt forced, performative, hollowed out by insecurity. Claire remained composed, but her energy had changed, more reserved, more distant, more careful with her expressions. When the director finally called cut, the silence afterward was heavy. Not the silence of concentration, the silence of conflict. The producers approached Megan first. They spoke softly, too softly, reassuring her, validating her, trying to keep her calm. Then, separately, another producer approached Claire. That conversation was different, diplomatic, respectful, apologetic without using apologetic words. Because here's the thing the cameraman noticed. No one thought Claire was the problem. But no one could risk Megan thinking she wasn't in control. Have you ever seen a situation where the wrong person is catered to because the consequences of honesty feel too dangerous? That's what it looked like. Lunch break was quiet. The crew scattered instead of clustering. Claire reviewed ingredients alone. Megan sat with her team, who laughed loudly, too loudly, at comments that didn't sound like jokes. And then came the moment that confirmed everything. A member of the culinary prep team approached Claire and said in a hushed voice, "Do you want us to adjust the plating to match her version?" Claire paused, considered, then replied, "No, we stay with the correct presentation. Not defiant, not emotional, just firm, protecting standards, protecting craft, protecting identity." But when Megan learned that the prep team was instructed to follow Claire's plating rather than hers, the cameraman said her entire demeanor changed again, like a thundercloud rolling over a sunny sky. She approached Claire directly for the first time that day, smiled tightly, and asked, "Is there a reason your way has to be the one we use?" Claire could have softened it. She could have deflected. She could have surrendered for the sake of peace. But she didn't. She answered honestly, "Because it's the correct technique." Silence. Thick. Undeniable. Charged. Megan blinked slowly, then said, with sugar-coated steel, "Well, maybe correctness isn't always the priority." Claire didn't reply. She didn't need to, because everyone in the room heard what Megan really meant. Correctness threatened her. And then, the real shift. The moment the cameraman said marked the beginning of the true unraveling. Megan turned to a producer and said, "Next time, have them ask me before finalizing anything." Them. Finalizing. Ask me. 3 words that changed the power structure of the entire show. From that moment on, every recipe became a negotiation. Every scene became a territory. Every garnish became a symbol. And Claire, though composed, began pulling inward. Not out of weakness, out of wisdom. Because she had seen this before. Not with Megan, but with personalities who cannot coexist with anyone who shines beside them. The cameraman said the rest of the day played out like a slow-motion collapse. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic enough to stop filming. Just a steady erosion of cooperation. And then, as the day ended, one final moment sealed it. Claire packed her tools. Not quickly, not angrily, but thoughtfully, methodically, deliberately. And as she left, she said quietly to a nearby crew member, "This isn't the environment I expected." Not a threat. Not a complaint, a statement, a foreshadowing, a warning. The cameraman said he didn't know it yet, but that was the day everything began moving toward the point of no return. Because the next day, Netflix stepped in, not to protect Claire, not to guide Megan, but to protect the show, and that decision would change the trajectory of the entire production. Because Netflix didn't call for a meeting with both women. They called for a meeting with Megan alone. The cameraman said the email went out before sunrise. A discreet message. Short, vague, neutral in wording, urgent in tone. It didn't mention conflict. It didn't mention tension. It didn't mention garnishes, egos, plating wars, or the moment when the air on set turned so cold that even the hot lamps couldn't thaw it. It simply read, "Mandatory production alignment meeting before call time. Sensitive topic. Attendance required." Have you ever received a message that pretended to be casual, but made your stomach twist anyway? That's how the crew described it. When they arrived, the studio felt different. Not chaotic, controlled. Too controlled. The set lights were dimmed. The kitchen counters were untouched. The props remained covered. Even the cameras were still in their cases. The entire space felt paused. Like the building itself was waiting to find out what kind of day it was supposed to prepare for. But here's what made it even more unsettling. Megan wasn't there. Claire wasn't there. Only the crew, the producers, and a Netflix liaison flown in quietly. Someone whose job existed for one reason only. Protect the production. Not protect the truth. Not protect the working environment. Not protect the people involved. Protect the outcome. The liaison began the meeting with a friendly smile. The kind used by people who are about to deliver instructions no one is allowed to openly resist. He thanked everyone for their professionalism. He praised the footage captured so far. He complimented the aesthetic, the tone, the energy, all the things that were currently cracking beneath the surface. Then he said the sentence the cameraman would never forget. "We need to ensure the show reflects the brand alignment we committed to." Brand alignment. Not authenticity. Not collaboration. Not culinary integrity. Brand alignment. Have you ever heard a phrase so polished it hides the mess it's built on? The crew shifted uncomfortably. Everyone understood what those words meant, even if they weren't said directly. Megan needed to look good. Her image needed protection. Her authority needed reinforcing. Her presence needed elevation. And Claire? Well, Claire needed to adapt. But it got even more explicit, without ever naming names. The liaison continued. Going forward, interactions should showcase harmony. Instructional dynamics should feel gentle and affirming. We want warmth, curiosity, and balance, but always led by the central personality. Central personality. Not the chef, not the expert, not the culinary star. The central personality. A cooking show where cooking was secondary. The cameraman said several crew members exchanged glances, small, quick, uneasy. They already knew what this meant, but hearing it confirmed by Netflix made it heavier. The liaison ended with a final instruction. If any moments feel off-brand, cut immediately and redirect before the tone shifts. Tone shifts. Code 4. Stop Megan from looking difficult. Stop Claire from looking dominant. Stop the truth from reaching the cameras. But here's where the story sharpens. 30 minutes later, there was a second meeting. A private one. With Megan. The crew didn't hear what was said, but they saw who came out of the room afterward. Megan emerged smiling. Not a relaxed smile, not a relieved smile, but a victorious smile. The kind of smile someone wears when they've been reassured that the world will continue to orbit around them exactly the way they expect it to. She didn't ask about changes. She didn't ask about adjustments. She didn't ask about collaboration. She asked one question. What time will Claire be arriving? That question told the cameraman everything he needed to know, because she didn't ask how Claire was. She didn't ask whether Claire was comfortable. She didn't ask if things needed smoothing. She asked when, because timing meant control. When Claire arrived, something was different about her too, but in the opposite direction. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't intimidated. She was simply more contained, more observant, more careful with where she placed her energy. The director gathered both women for a quick rundown of the adjusted segment order. Megan nodded as though she already knew. Claire listened without expression. Then Megan added, lightly, I think it will work much better this way. The cameraman said. Claire paused. Just 1 second. The kind of pause that communicates 1,000 unspoken truths. But she didn't disagree. Because professionals don't need to win every moment. They just need to maintain integrity. Filming resumed. And the difference was immediate. The script favored Megan. The camera favored Megan. The conversational cues favored Megan. The pacing favored Megan. Claire was now positioned not as a partner, but as a supporting character. Have you ever watched someone powerful being quietly resized on purpose? The cameraman said the first hour of filming felt like watching a mural being painted over. Claire still delivered expertise, but shorter, softer, less central. Megan repeated her instructions in simplified language, as though translating them for an imaginary audience who couldn't understand Claire without her. It was subtle, but it was undeniable, and the crew noticed something else. Megan started giving directions to the camera team. Let's shoot this angle instead. Get a closer reaction shot here. We should redo that. Not suggestions. Instructions. The kind of instructions only a producer or director would normally give. One cameraman glanced at the director, waiting for a reaction. But the director looked away. Because Netflix had already answered the question in the morning meeting. The show belonged to Megan. Even if it didn't. The real turning point came midway through the day, during a segment where Claire guided Megan through a flavor pairing exercise. Megan fumbled, slightly, innocently. Not enough to embarrass her, just enough to create a learning moment. The perfect opportunity for humility, humor, charm. But humility wasn't an option. Megan pivoted the moment into a scripted-sounding reflection about personal creativity in the kitchen, reframing her mistake as innovation. Claire smiled politely, but the cameraman caught something in her eyes. This wasn't sustainable. Not for credibility. Not for professionalism. Not for truth. The crew's energy shifted again, but this time, it wasn't just discomfort. It was anticipation. Because the imbalance was growing. And imbalances always collapse eventually. The day wrapped with polite smiles, gentle goodbyes, and a calm surface that didn't match the undercurrents swirling beneath it. As Claire left the studio, the cameraman overheard her ask a nearby coordinator, "Can you confirm my schedule for the remaining filming days?" Remaining filming days. Plural. Scheduled. Confirmed. Expected. But fate, or ego, or pressure, or branding, had other plans. Because after she left, another meeting occurred. A very small one. Just two producers. The Netflix liaison. And Megan. No one knows exactly what was said. No one knows exactly what was proposed. No one knows exactly what decision began forming in that room. But the cameraman said he saw something that told him everything. When Megan walked out, she didn't look relieved. She looked triumphant. And triumph always means someone else is about to lose ground. The crew packed equipment in silence that evening. People moved quickly, quietly, like they didn't want to be the last one in the building when the next shift of the story arrived. Because something was coming. Something inevitable. Something irreversible. And the cameraman said he could feel it in his ribs. Because the next day wasn't about recipes. It wasn't about plating. It wasn't about brand alignment. It was about something far more dangerous. Audio. Accidental audio. Unfiltered audio. Audio that was never meant to be heard. Audio that revealed everything. It happened because someone forgot to turn a microphone off. That's how the cameraman tells it. Not because someone was spying. Not because someone was plotting. Not because someone intended to capture anything private. It happened the way most explosive behind-the-scenes moments happen. Through a tiny oversight that snowballed into a revelation no one was prepared for. He said the day started quietly, almost eerily so. Megan arrived without her usual entourage. Claire arrived without her usual calm glow. The crew spoke in softer tones. Even the assistants, who normally buzzed around with clipboards and checklists, moved more slowly, like they were afraid to disturb the air. Have you ever been in a room where everyone sensed something was coming, but no one knew which direction it would arrive from? That was the energy. The first hour of filming went smoothly, too smoothly. Megan followed the script. Claire kept her tone neutral. The producers whispered less. The director didn't call for resets as often. The cameraman said it felt like watching actors perform a truce they didn't sign. But the real story didn't start in front of the camera. It started during a reset break. The crew stepped away to adjust lighting angles. The culinary team replenished ingredients. The director reviewed footage. Megan and Claire both walked off set, separately, silently, strategically. But what no one realized, not the sound team, not the production assistants, not even the cameraman, was that one of the boom microphones remained active, still recording, still transmitting, still listening, and what it picked up would change everything. According to the cameraman, it began with a voice, Megan's, low, controlled, sharp enough to cut through the static with clarity. I'm not going to let her take over the show. Not shouted, not emotional, just cold certainty. Then another voice, someone from her team, whispering, she's getting too much presence in the edits. Edits. Presence. Take over. Words that didn't belong in a cooking show. Words that revealed the real concern wasn't flavor, it was power. Have you ever heard someone speak in a way that confirms every suspicion you hoped was wrong? The cameraman said the crew froze as the audio fed through a monitor. No one spoke. No one moved. No one knew whether to turn it off or pretend they hadn't heard it. But the audio kept going. Another line from Megan. Make sure they don't frame her as the expert. I'm the face of this. The face. Not the host. Not the student. Not the collaborator. The face. Then the most telling part. The part the cameraman said sent a visible wave through the crew. She needs to follow my lead or she shouldn't be here. That sentence didn't just expose tension. It exposed motive. And then... footsteps. Megan walked back toward the set. The audio stopped only because the sound tech scrambled and killed the feed before she entered. He said his hands were shaking. Not because he feared punishment. Because he realized what the recording meant. Someone else realized it too, the director. The director pulled the sound tech aside immediately. Not loudly. Not angrily. Quietly, the way someone handles a live explosive device. The conversation was short, intense, whispered. The cameraman couldn't hear it, but he saw the sound tech nod rapidly, like someone agreeing to conditions they didn't choose. And then, just as the director turned to walk away, another voice came through the speakers. Claire's. Not cold. Not aggressive. Just tired. I can't do my job if she won't let me. Silence fell again. The cameraman said it was the kind of silence that feels like the floor shifting beneath your feet. Because Claire wasn't complaining about ego. She wasn't complaining about camera angles.